Hello, and welcome to the tutorial on how to complete the form for the Home and Community-Based Services, also referred to as HCBS, Rights Modification Support Plan Attachment DHS-7176H. My name is Dan Goldstein, and I will be guiding you through this tutorial. First, we will discuss the purpose of this form. This form is used by case managers and care coordinators when a person receiving HCBS requires a modification to their HCBS rights based on specific and individual assessed needs that are necessary to ensure their health, safety, and well-being. For example, a rights modification may be necessary when a person's assessment identifies that having a lock on their bedroom door would prevent required visual supervision of a person who exhibits self-harming behaviors. Another example of when a rights modification may be necessary is when a person's assessment identifies the need to restrict their access to food at any time due to their medical condition, such as Prader-Willi syndrome. Now, we will discuss general responsibilities. Later in this tutorial, I will explain how to complete all the sections of the form. But for right now, let's talk about who's responsible for completing the different sections of the form. This information will clarify who is responsible to fill out each section, approve the modification plan, and review the information with the person receiving waiver HCBS. Case managers and care coordinators are responsible to complete Part A, which is general and demographic information about the person who is receiving waiver HCBS, and Part B, which identifies the assessed needs and justifies the HCBS rights to be modified. After Part A and Part B are completed, the case manager or care coordinator sends the form to the provider. The form is sent to the provider using the same methods used when sending the support plan to the provider. This may be done differently by each lead agency. For example, the form may be sent by secure email, postal mail, faxed, or delivered in person. Whichever method is currently used to share other waiver HCBS communications between the case manager or care coordinator and the provider should also be used to send the HCBS rights modification form. Once received, the provider is responsible for completing Part C, which is the plan to modify the person's rights identified in the assessment. After documenting the modification plan, the provider returns the completed form back to the case manager or care coordinator to review. The case manager or care coordinator reviews the provider documentation and confirms that the provider has documented the plan to modify the person's rights in a safe and least restrictive manner, and the case manager or care coordinator facilitates a meeting to review the plan with the person. Ideally, this would be done with the case manager or care coordinator, the provider, and the person and their legal guardian to discuss and answer any questions. The person, or legal guardian if they have one, then completes Part D by signing and indicating whether they approve or refuse the modification of their rights identified in the plan. Finally, the case manager or care coordinator will communicate the person and/or the guardian's decision with the provider. A signed copy of the form will be provided to the provider and the person and their guardian if a guardian is required. The case manager or care coordinator incorporates the decision into the person's support plan and maintains a copy of the rights modification form using the same method used to maintain the support plan. The provider incorporates the decision into the service delivery plan and maintains a copy in the person's file at the setting. Now, we will discuss the agenda for this tutorial. This tutorial will cover the following topics: how to use this form, case manager and care coordinator, Parts A and B, provider, Part C, and person, Part D. If you want to advance this video to a specific topic, the timestamps are as follows. How to use this form, 4 minutes, 25 seconds. Case manager and care coordinator, Parts A and B, 7 minutes, 31 seconds. Provider, Part C, 14 minutes, 43 seconds, and person, Part D, 18 minutes, 16 seconds. Let's get started with our first topic, how to use this form. This form is available online in the Minnesota Department of Human Services eDocs webpage. This is at the URL https://mn.gov/general-public/publications-forms-resources/edocs. It is Form DHS-7176H-ENG. To access the form, type the following URL into your browser: edocs.dhs.st80public/public/public/public/public/eng. Or you can search for it on the main eDocs webpage by typing in 7176H in the search field. If you receive an error accessing this document online, it is likely because you are using a browser other than Internet Explorer. Either switch your browser or right-click on the link to the PDF document and download it to your computer. Once you have accessed the form online, you can either partially complete it online, save it and complete it electronically, or print out a blank form to complete it manually, or any combination of these options. If you plan to complete the form online, the case manager or care coordinator will complete the information in parts A and B and then save or print the form to give to the provider. Note that you can use the same method you typically use for sharing information in forms, whether that be by fax, mail, secure email, in person, etc. To save the PDF with the information you completed in parts A and B, click on the File menu and select Save As. To print the form with your information, click on the File menu and then select Print. If you are not going to complete any of the form online, click the button that says Print Blank Form. When you click on this button, your printer dialog box will appear, prompting you to print the form. In the next few sections, I will talk about who is responsible for completing each part of the form and how to do so. In this section, I will talk about the responsibilities of the case managers and care coordinators, as well as how to complete parts A and B. If you are a case manager or care coordinator, this section is for you. Case managers and care coordinators are responsible to complete parts A and B of the form for the HCBS Rights Modification Support Plan attachment. At the end of this section, I will highlight additional steps the case managers and care coordinators are responsible to take to complete this process. Let's walk through Part A first. In this tutorial video, I am using the live online version of the form, so it may look different if you are using the printed blank form version. Find Part A of the form and click on the box that says Click for A Details. This will reveal the fields for Part A, which is the basic and demographic information about the person receiving waiver HCBS. Type in the information about the person whose rights need to be modified, their provider, and your information. Complete all of the information in Part A except the field for the effective date of the rights modification. You can leave this field blank for right now, if the date is unknown, as you can fill in the date later when you have reviewed the modification plan with the person. Once you have completed Part A, click on the box that says Click for B Details, and you will get additional information and instructions. Part B is where the case manager or care coordinator will document the required modifications of the person's rights. The modification must be necessary to ensure the health, safety, and well-being of the person and must be based on the person's assessed needs. The person's needs may be identified at an initial long-term care consultation or min-choices assessment, a reassessment, or by notification from the person's support team, which may include the provider. In question number 1, you will identify each of the HCBS rights that require a modification by checking the box in front of the right to be modified. Be sure to check all that apply. Only the rights that are allowable to be modified under the HCBS rule requirements are listed on this form. 245D licensed providers should continue to follow the process for rights restrictions per 245D licensing requirements. Check box A to modify the person's right to personal privacy, such as having a lock on the bedroom door. Check box B to modify the person's right to take part in activities that they choose or to have an individual schedule that includes their preferences. Check box C to modify the person's right to have access to food at any time. Or check box D to modify the person's right to choose their own visitors and time or time of visits. In question number 2, the case manager or care coordinator will identify why the person needs the modification to their rights and the justification for the modification. Note that the justification must be based on the needs identified in the assessment, not on preferences or judgments by the case manager or care coordinator or the provider. In question 2, find the section that has the corresponding letter to a right listed in question 1 that will be modified. For example, if you checked box C to modify the person's right to have access to food at any time, then find the section in question 2 that starts with the letter C. In this example, we will start with C1 to document the person's condition or diagnosis, the assessed need, and the justification for modifying the person's right to have access to food at any time. So, in the diagnosis field, we will type in that David has Prader-Willi syndrome, a condition that causes him to ingest large quantities of food. Then, in the assessed needs field, we will type in that David and his physician are working together to manage the condition. In the meantime, David and his guardian have worked with his case manager and provider to determine to limit his access to food items to help him remain healthy. Finally, in the justification field, we will type in that David's adult foster care services provider will help David build his skill set to work toward the ability to manage his food intake independently. Without this modification, David will eat until he becomes physically ill. Be sure to use language that the person will understand. This will be important for the person in order to agree or disagree with the plan developed to modify their rights in Part C. For additional examples of what information to include in questions 2, click on the link in the form that says, "For help completing this section, see HCBS Rights Modifications Examples." Every person and their situation is different. The examples here are to be used only as a reference to see the information that is expected to be documented on this form. Once the case manager or care coordinator have completed Part B, you can save or print the form and send it to the provider to complete Part C. Remember that you can use the same method you typically use for sharing information and forms with the provider, whether that be by fax, mail, secure email, in person, etc. After receiving the form back from the provider, you will confirm that the provider documented how the modification of the person's rights will be implemented in Part C. You will then review the modification plan with the person. Details for this step are later in this tutorial in the section about the person. Finally, once the form is completed and signed by the person, it is your responsibility to incorporate the person's decision to approve or refuse the rights modification plan into the person's support plan. A copy of the signed document is maintained in the person's file as an attachment to the support plan. You are also responsible to provide a copy of the signed form to the provider and the person. In this section, I will talk about the responsibilities of the provider as well as how to complete Part C of the form. If you are a provider, this section is for you. It is the provider's responsibility to complete Part C of the form. As a provider, you will get the form from the case manager or care coordinator with parts A and B already completed. You will get the form in the same method you typically use for sharing information and forms, whether that be by fax, mail, secure email, in person, etc. At the end of this section, I will highlight additional steps the provider is responsible to take to complete this process. Let's get started with Part C. You have a few options in how to provide the information in Part C, which is the modification plan information. First, you can complete the information in this form either electronically or manually in writing. Second, you may use your own form to meet the requirements, but your form must contain all of the elements that are part of this form. Third, if you are a 245D licensed provider, you may complete and attach the Home and Community-Based Services Rights Restriction Form if you already have restrictions to the identified right in place for the person. This form can be accessed via a link in the form. If you are not completing Part C in this form, you will need to check the box after using other templates to indicate that you are attaching other documentation. To complete Part C, you will answer questions 3 through 6. Note that the text boxes are expandable. If you are documenting the modification of more than one right, be sure to indicate which right your narrative is related to. For example, if you are modifying the person's right to have access to food at any time, this would correspond to C1. After you have completed questions 3 through 6, you will leave the next section blank. You will complete the actual review and whether it is more or less restrictive when the review occurs at a later date, which is specified in question 5. Once you have completed all the modification plan information for each modified right, you will need to send the form to the case manager or care coordinator. You can send the form in the same method you typically use for sharing information and forms, whether that be by fax, mail, secure email, in person, etc. Be sure to include this completed form along with any supporting documentation or other forms that meet the requirements of Part C. The case manager or care coordinator will then review your modification plan and approve it or ask you for clarification or revision if needed. They will also review it with the person and their guardian if they have one, who will indicate approval or refusal and sign it. Again, it is ideal if all members of the support team are present at the meeting to review the plan with the person. At a minimum, if the person has a legal guardian, the legal guardian must approve or refuse and sign their decision on the form. If the person or their guardian approves of the modification plan, you will then incorporate them into the person's service delivery plan. In this section, I will talk about the responsibilities of the case manager and care coordinators to complete Part D of the form. In some cases, the provider may also be involved in completing Part D. So, if you are a case manager, care coordinator, or provider, this section is for you. It is the case manager or care coordinator's responsibility to review the modification plan with the person and their guardian if they have one. First, you will have the person and their guardian read the form and make sure they understand the modification plan. If the person is unable to read or understand the terms used in the form, you will need to explain the contents to them and make sure they understand what will change and when a review of the plan will take place. You should also make sure the person and their guardian knows they have the right to approve or refuse the changes. After you have reviewed the plan with the person and guardian, it is time to indicate their approval or refusal and sign the form. Click on one of the circles to indicate whether the person and guardian approves or refuses the plan. When you click on the circle, a statement will appear to verify their understanding of their rights. Review the statement with them to ensure understanding. Next, you will print the completed form so that the person and guardian can sign and date it. Note that this process does not override a guardian's legal authority to make decisions on behalf of the person. This process is part of the overall person-centered planning process. So, if the person has a guardian, the guardian would be required to sign for legal consent on the legal representative line. If not, the person is legally responsible to sign the form. Once the form is completed and signed, you will fill in the effective start date of the modification plan in Part A, if not already done so. This is a good time to remind the person of the agreed timeline of when the plan will be reviewed. And you should remind the person that they also have the right to request a review of the plan as needed. Finally, you will incorporate the person and/or guardian's decision to approve or refuse the plan into the person's support plan. A copy of the signed document should be maintained in the person's file as an attachment to the support plan, and the provider will incorporate the rights modifications plan into the service delivery plan. If you have questions regarding the use of this form, please email the HCBS team at hcbs.settings@state.mn.us. That is hcbs.settings@state.mn.us. Thank you.